First meeting of the Palestinian National Committee administering Gaza begins in Cairo. Gaza Committee Chief Ali Shaath says the new 15-member technocratic team will focus on relief and reconstruction. And Trump warns Tehran of grave consequences if the killing of demonstrators continue.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful, and very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate, and you are a great leader. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great president, and I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much.
The news in detail. The first meeting of the Palestinian National Committee tasked with administering Gaza has begun in Cairo, according to Palestinian sources. The head of the committee, Ali Shaath, arrived in the Egyptian capital on Wednesday ahead of the talks. The committee is tasked with managing day-to-day affairs in Gaza, and the meeting comes after Washington announced the start of Phase 2 of its plan aimed at ending the war in Gaza. Gaza National Committee Chief Ali Shaath says the new body is a 15-member technocratic team backed by donor funding with priorities focused on relief and reconstruction. In Al Qahira news channel interview, Shaath praised Egypt, the mediators, and U.S. President Donald Trump for what he called vital support to Palestinians. He said the Palestinian leadership wants the committee to help link Gaza and the West Bank to advance national goals. Shaath said donor countries have approved a 2-year budget and stressed the next step is establishing a World Bank fund for Gaza relief and reconstruction. He also said the committee will rely on Arab partners led by Egypt to help secure contractors for rebuilding efforts. A Hamas spokesperson says the group welcomes a technocratic committee to administer post-war Gaza, calling it a step that could reinforce the ceasefire. Hazem Qasim said the committee would help consolidate the truce and reduce the risk of a return to fighting. He framed the proposal as a practical arrangement for day-to-day governance after the war. Details on the committee's mandate, membership, and how it would operate on the ground have not been confirmed. Egypt's foreign minister and U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff say Phase 2 of President Donald Trump's plan must move forward and that the Palestinian Technocratic Committee should begin work once its formation is finally announced. They also stressed during a phone call the need to deploy an international stabilization force to monitor the ceasefire and said Israel should complete its withdrawal from Gaza. The two sides underscored the importance of starting reconstruction efforts once conditions are in place, alongside the committee taking up its work after its formation is announced. Egypt, Cyprus, and the European Union have rejected military solutions to regional crises and backed moving ahead with Phase 2 of President Donald Trump's Gaza plan. Egypt's foreign ministry says the position was discussed in a phone call involving Egypt's and Cyprus foreign ministers and the EU foreign policy chief. The statement says the three sides agreed on the need to implement the next phase of the plan on Gaza and to begin reconstruction projects in the Strip. Arab Parliament Speaker Mohammed Ali Mahi has welcomed the announcement that a Palestinian National Committee to administer Gaza has been fully formed. In a statement, Ali Mahi described the step as an important development towards restoring stability. He praised Egypt and the mediators for helping reach what he called a Palestinian national understanding. He also stressed the need to ensure Israel fully respect the agreement, including a complete withdrawal from Gaza. The United Nations says Gaza has more than 60 million tons of rubble, and clearing it could take more than 7 years. A senior UN official said harsh winter conditions and heavy rain are worsening hardship and despair for residents. He said recovery for Gaza's 2 million people and restoring basic services in areas heavily damaged by Israeli attacks urgently depends on safe shelter, fuel supplies, and large-scale rubble removal. For more analysis, we now move to Mark Summers in our newsroom. To you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Moni. Yes, to further unpack the situation regarding the new National Committee in Gaza, we are joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist. Thanks for being with us here this afternoon. So what does the formation of this Palestinian Technocratic Committee signal?
Of course, hello, Mark. Great to be with you once again. Of course, it signals that despite Israel's attempts to obstruct the implementation of the ceasefire agreement through its incessant violations and non-compliance with the terms of the agreement and its obligations under this agreement, despite all of this, the Palestinians and the Arab mediators and even the United States to an extent are advancing this forward and are pushing the implementation forward, basically now with the formation of this National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. This means that we have progressed to the second phase of the Trump plan for the settlement of the Gaza conflict. And of course, it is a step in the right direction. It means that now some executive steps will be taken on the ground where Hamas will transfer power to this new National Committee, which will be acclaimed internationally as a Palestinian body that governs Gaza, that will be free of constraints and free of sanctions and supported by the international community. So, of course, this will definitely serve to advance the agenda of reconstruction of Gaza and of the restabilization and rehabilitation even of the Gaza Strip and the early recovery of the Strip itself. And it will mount arguably at least, more pressure on the Israelis so that they would honor at least some of their commitments under this agreement, especially the idea of withdrawing or the point of withdrawing or redeploying to new lines inside Gaza. Of course, I'm being exaggeratingly optimistic at this point because in order for this to happen, it needs substantial pressure from the United States on the Israeli side because Israel on its own has no will whatsoever to implement this agreement or honor any of its terms. However, the formation and the creation of this National Committee is a substantial step in the right direction and signals that this Gaza agreement and the Trump plan are here to stay.
Well, of course, we had this meeting with Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and Egypt's Foreign Minister, Dr. Badr Abdel-Ati, both saying that they must move on to phase two. So how can Egypt and the United States turn what is a political pledge about phase two into a reality?
I think Egypt is trying to turn it indeed from a political pledge, as you called it, into an actual reality that is being realized on the ground. And I think that the first step is the formation of the committee itself. The second step, of course, will this committee going to Gaza and actually taking over the reins of power from Hamas. However, this would also require an actual coherent timeline for the redeployment of the Israeli occupation troops inside the Gaza Strip. Because let's not forget, Mark, Israel occupies about 60% of Gaza and Hamas controls whatever is left, which is basically a wasteland that is 85% destroyed, as Ali Shah, the head the director of the National Committee of Gaza, did mention with his in his interview with your sister channel Al Qahira Al Ikhbariyya. So it seems that the implementation on the ground will require that Israel cooperate. What are we hearing from Israel so far, Mark? We are hearing the Israelis and Netanyahu calling the establishment of this committee symbolic, and we've seen on the ground how the Israelis are acting. Yesterday, they carried out a series of airstrikes on Gaza, killing 10 Palestinian civilians. So basically, they are conveying a very wrong message to the international community and to the United States. This could even be tantamount to a challenge to the mediators itself. Israel sending a message saying that we're not going to comply seriously with any of this. The only condition under which they would is under substantial U.S. pressure, and I think this is what Egypt is aiming at. Egypt is coordinating and communicating incessantly and non-stop with the United States, with its American partners, in order to push forward the implementation of this agreement, which requires the United States as a mediator and a guarantor, for God's sake, that the plan carries Trump's name. So he has to apply pressure on the Israelis so that they would be more flexible and allow for more implementation at this point.
So what governance model would you say best avoids a vacuum in Gaza?
I don't think we're approaching a vacuum at this point. I think that now, when Hamas gives up power to the committee, this basically negates the idea of a vacuum. We have a coherent national committee that has garnered the consensus of the Palestinian factions and the Palestinian society at large, and most importantly, the Palestinian people in Gaza as well. And it also has the consent and the approval of the United States, the Arab mediators, and even Israel itself. So this leaves no room for a vacuum, because there are Palestinian police forces that were transferred to Egypt and to Jordan and were being trained over the past couple of years so that they would take over security in the Gaza Strip and be the security arm of this national committee, or this interim government that will be installed in Gaza. So I think that there will not be a vacuum, and the Palestinian factions will be cooperative. The vacuum exists in the areas that lie under Israeli occupation, where Israel is not really governing anything. It has depopulated these regions largely. Only a handful of thousand people live in these areas, and they live under occupation and are being terrorized by either the occupation forces or these militias of mercenaries that the Israelis have employed inside the Gaza Strip as well, in the areas under their control. So I think these questions need to be addressed at the Israelis, and how they plan to redeploy their forces and those militias that work for them to new lines, so that the new authority in Gaza can take over Gaza and govern it efficiently and move forward with the implementation of all of the provisions of the Trump plan.
Well, let's come to verification, Dr. Osman. What tools can give credibility to ceasefire monitoring?
I think that of course, this ceasefire lacks any credibility, because the Israelis have a very convoluted definition of what a ceasefire is. They have this definition that a ceasefire is when one side gets to shoot and the other doesn't. So basically, this is how the Israelis are conducting themselves since this ceasefire went into effect about 3 months ago. They have murdered over 500 Palestinians during a ceasefire, quote unquote, of course. They have expanded their areas of control. The front line is moving forward. Instead, they control about 55% at the beginning of the ceasefire. Now they control about 59% of the Gaza Strip. So basically, this is a dark comedy, basically, Mark, what we are witnessing on the ground. However, the Palestinians remain committed to the ceasefire despite the Israeli violations. And I think that the United States needs to be more proactive in its ceasefire monitoring mechanism. We do have a center inside Israel in which many nations are involved in order to monitor the implementation of the ceasefire in Gaza. Yet we have not seen this center once, this U.S.-led military center once issue one single condemnation of what the Israel, or even documentation of the countless Israeli violations of the ceasefire. We are seeing now daily strikes and attacks, almost daily strikes and attacks on different targets of the Gaza Strip, killing whether Hamas operatives or civilians in violation of the ceasefire, where the Palestinian side, for most of the time, basically complies and adheres to the ceasefire and does not answer the Israeli provocations. So I think that the entire ceasefire monitoring mechanism needs to be revised moving forward, because if the condition stays the same when the new administrative committee takes over control in Gaza and the Israelis resume this kind of behavior, it will definitely pose as a major challenge to the ceasefire agreement and could actually lead to its collapse and a return once again to open conflict.
Well, indeed, and there's of course been lots of talk of a stabilization force. Does this need to be designed to complement and not overshadow any Palestinian administration?
Definitely, it needs to act as such. It needs to act as such. The idea that this force, and there is a problem right now with determining the details of the mandate of this force, which makes it a huge question mark. And this uncertainty basically has scared so many countries away who reportedly expressed initial commitment to sending forces and joining this international stabilization force, yet now many of those countries have backed out. Countries reportedly like Azerbaijan and even Indonesia said that they're not ready to send troops anymore, at least at the moment. The Europeans have conditioned their participation with certain guarantees and certain conditions that have to be fulfilled first. And of course, how Israel is conducting itself on the ground and what the Israelis are saying about the mission of the ISF is basically very concerning, because they wanted to go in there and act as a peace enforcement force that will actually undertake the task of the disarmament of Hamas, which should happen through political dialogue and not any military operations, which basically means that they will be replacing the Israelis think that they can outsource their military objectives to this new peacekeeping force. And this is, of course, what the Arab mediators and most of the international community rejects utterly at this point. So any deployment of international troops in the Gaza Strip, they should be there to maintain security, keep the peace, monitor the ceasefire, and actually support the mission of the new interim committee in Gaza and its national Palestinian security forces that will be its arm in imposing law and order in the Strip. And the Palestinian factions from their side, Hamas, has declared that they are willing to turn over power to this new entity, to this new national committee, and that they are willing to cooperate all the way. Go ahead, Mark. Excuse me.
Yeah. How important is it that this committee then builds international recognition fast and also manages to shift public perceptions inside Gaza to gain some kind of stability?
Of course, this committee did not come out of nowhere, Mark. This committee basically is led by Ali Shaf. Ali Shaf is a technocrat. He is a very esteemed Palestinian civil servant. He served in administrative and political capacities in the past in the Palestinian Authority, including as the deputy minister or the vice minister of planning, which means that this man came from the bureaucracy, the national bureaucracy of the Palestinian state. And this Palestinian state is recognized by over 160 countries all around the world, that is an observer state in the United Nations. And the Palestinian Authority itself recognizes the new national committee in Gaza. And the new national committee in Gaza never said that it is associated with the Palestinian Authority. If anything, its symbolic and de facto reference of legitimacy is to the Palestinian Authority. And it is supposed to be there in an interim manner until the Palestinian Authority later on, a few months or even a couple of years later, can assume responsibilities once again and return to the Gaza Strip, which means that this committee has secured all the angles of legitimacy it needs. Internationally recognized, of course, it is, because the international community supports the Trump peace plan and the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement and recognizes this committee as an interim governing entity in the Gaza Strip, and also the Palestinian Authority, which is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, does recognize it also. So this idea of this duality of the Palestinian scene, where we had a dual entities that led the Palestinian scene, opposing entities, the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas government of Gaza, This is way behind us now. Now we have an interim government in Gaza that is recognized by the Palestinian Authority and has links, even though if they are not institutionally declared, with the Palestinian Authority.
Well, very important developments. We shall continue to watch them closely here at Qnews. Dr. Osman, always good to have your take. International relations expert joining us from Cairo, Dr. Mohammed Osman. And now it's back to you, Mona, in the studio.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for the analysis. When we return now from Gaza to Iran, where pressures is building on multiple fronts, with Washington warning of grave consequences, Moscow monitoring the unrest, and reports of fresh U.S. military moves in the region. The White House says U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Tehran of grave consequences if the killing of demonstrators in Iran continues. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the warning was delivered as the administration monitors the situation closely. In the same briefing, she said President Trump hopes Venezuela will hold elections one day without giving a timeline. Leavitt also said Trump wants the United States to acquire Greenland. The Kremlin says Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian about the situation in Iran. The Kremlin said Pezeshkian briefed Putin on efforts by Iranian authorities to calm the situation inside the country. It added that both leaders reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening the strategic partnership between Russia and Iran. New Zealand has temporarily closed its embassy in Tehran and evacuated all diplomatic staff, citing escalating violence and repression. Foreign Minister Winston Peters said New Zealand is shocked by rising violence and the crackdown in Iran and stressed Iranians have the right to peaceful protest. He said diplomatic and consular operations related to Iran will be handled from Ankara, Turkey, for the time being. The New York Times reports that a craft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln is expected to reach the Middle East within a week amid new U.S. military preparations linked to Iran. Fox News, citing military sources, reports additional missile defense systems could be sent to the region to reinforce protection of U.S. bases. The report describes the moves as part of a forced posture effort aimed at giving U.S. President Donald Trump military options should he decide to launch strikes against Iran. Neither report details specific deployment timelines beyond the expected carrier arrival window. Iranians living in Turkey rallied in Yalova in support of protests in Iran, condemning the crackdown and communications shutdown. Demonstrators marched through the northwestern Turkish province, waving pre-revolution Iranian flags and chanting anti-government slogans. Some said they have not heard from relatives for days and accused authorities of cutting internet and basic services. Others described the unrest as a massacre and called for political change, with signs in English reading "Free Iran" and banners urging the world not to stay silent. Meanwhile, South Korean activists rallied outside Iran's embassy in Seoul, voicing support for protesters in Iran and condemning Tehran's crackdown. The group chanted slogans calling for an end to the killings of protesters and said it supports anti-government demonstrations while opposing any U.S. military intervention in Iran. Rights group Harana has reported a death toll in the thousands, though Reuters says it cannot independently verify the figures. Iranian authorities have blamed foreign enemies for fueling the unrest and say armed individuals they describe as terrorists have targeted security forces. At the UN Security Council, the United States said President Donald Trump has all options on the table over Iran, while Tehran warned any aggression would be met with decisive response. U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz said Washington stands with what he called the brave people of Iran and rejected Tehran's claims the protests are a foreign plot. Iran's deputy UN ambassador said Iran does not seek escalation, but warned any direct or indirect aggression would draw a proportionate and lawful response. Russia's UN ambassador accused the United States of using the Council session to justify interference in a sovereign state and urged restraint in Washington and other capitals. UNICEF is warning children across Ukraine risk hypothermia as power cuts deepen and emergency generator stocks run low after Russian strikes on energy infrastructure. The UN agency says it is racing to help restore water and heating services hit by missile and drone attacks as Ukraine nears 4 years since Russia's invasion. UNICEF says families are living in constant survival mode with overnight temperatures around minus 18 degrees Celsius in some areas. Officials say Kiev and frontline regions have been hardest hit, with homes in the capital and several other regions left without electricity or heating for days. Ukraine's president has signaled a state of emergency for the energy sector. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says some Western supplied air defense systems ran out of missiles during Russia's latest strikes on energy infrastructure. Speaking in Kiev, Zelensky said that until Thursday morning, several systems had no missile left, but that he can now say the shortage has been addressed because new supplies have arrived. His comments come as Ukraine faces repeated drone and missile attacks targeting power and heating, with officials warning of outages and mounting pressures on the energy sector. Lithuania says Russia's GRU, or the GRU, military intelligence service was behind attempted arson attacks on the plant supplying equipment to Ukraine army. Prosecutors say 6 people of various nationalities have been arrested and charged over the 2024 attacks, each facing up to 15 years in jail if convicted. Police said the operation was coordinated from Russia with orders linked to individuals connected to the GRU. Lithuanian officials say the same network attempted similar arson plots in Poland, Romania, and the Czech Republic, and they have issued international warrants for additional suspects. Russia has not commented and has previously denied allegations of sabotage in the region. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we wrap up, here is a recap of the top stories making headlines this hour. First meeting of the Palestinian National Committee administering Gaza begins in Cairo. Gaza Committee Chief Ali Shath says the new 15-member technocratic team will focus on relief and reconstruction. And Trump warns the one of grave consequences if the killing of demonstrators continue. For more stories and live update, follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY. From all of us here, many thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more news and analysis on Qnews.